I've been fairly vocal about my disappointment and higher expectations for Code Vein 2. The game is coming out trying to remove itself from the original story, and is a game being made by the team who makes the God Eater franchise, which I do like a lot more, and would have vastly preferred a new God Eater game made by Shift as opposed to a Code Vein 2. I also kind of expected them to make Code Vein 2 anyways because it sold better, but whatever. That said, upon completing the game, I can't deny that I'm much happier than I was during the process of playing it. And that might sound really bad, but there are a lot of reasons for my suffering and my satisfaction. So please, take a seat, because I'm going to tell you about my experience with Code Vein 2.
Truly, the potential of man is beyond reckoning.
Change is often incremental. It happens over time with small changes happening. Large changes that happen in an instant tend to lead to catastrophic consequences for everyone involved. Change and alteration needs to be thought out, calculated, and understood by the sides implementing the change, as well as the ones who will be affected. Code Vein 2 is a departure from the original game's world, story, and characters. From what I can tell, that's a very mixed pot of opinions. Some people would have vastly preferred if the game stayed in its original setting. Others feel as though the combined universe of God Eater and Code Vein would ultimately hold back Code Vein as a story. And some people just don't really care. If the game's story is good, why does it matter? And I think for myself, I'm sitting in all three camps. I'm definitely disappointed that my only potential source of God Eater lore is now gone. Assuming that Bandai has ditched the God Eater IP, which I'm not sure if I'm ready to fully admit yet. And that Code Vein 1 is probably never going to see a continuation. It depends on if this game sells well, and I'm not really sure where that stands right now. On the flip side, I believe that being forced to confine itself to the God Eater timeline would be a detriment to Code Vein as a story. Because Code Vein comes after all the God Eater stuff, never once in the God Eater universe are Revenants brought up. Which means that the series would have to tread carefully on the side of things that were not explored in its shared universe. In fairness though, America is never brought up in the God Eater universe. In fact, we've only had games in Europe and Japan. So the American side of the God Eater universe is just untouched, which I believe is where Code Vein 1 takes place. Thirdly, if Code Vein's new universe holds its own, then it really doesn't matter, does it? I mean, I can't complain if the story is good, but I think this issue has divided a lot of the community on whether or not you can walk into this game with a fresh outlook. Instead, many people's expectations are much higher because you have to prove to them that letting go of the old universe is the right move. And I'm saying this now because this is how I felt when I started. I walked in hoping they could prove me wrong in an instant, and needless to say, they definitely did not.
I'll set you free! I'll find a way!
Customization was a vital piece of Code Vein. Your blood code determined what you could and could not do, your weapon added weight to your character, which changed how your dodges work, numerous blood veils could alter how you use drain attacks, and because of all this, building your character was a delight in that game. The ease of customization that you could do simply by opening a menu was fantastic. Code Vein 2 retains that focus on customization, but it pulls in the reins a little bit on how often you can do it. Your skills are now tied directly to your weapon, as opposed to the blood code, which you can only alter at missiles. The blood codes now have a burden system. Going too heavy into one stat can cause detrimental effects such as health drain. And your blood veil no longer has variations, and instead is now just a single function, which are the jails. And this might sound a bit more restricting, but I believe it is a very mixed experience. The burden system is kind of annoying and gives you a lot of issues when it comes to selecting which weapons to use, and it's no longer just about your weight and your dodging ability. You have all of these overburden issues when you have too many stats in a blood code that can't really handle those stats. There are passives that activate with Overburden, so sometimes it's good to have Overburden because it gives you certain extra passives. But as far as I can tell, the Overburden passives, they're far and few in between. If you're doing a challenge run, then Overburden is great, but if you're just trying to play the game, then it feels just like a detriment, like there's no benefit to having it. If you're going to have a passive constantly drain my health, then I expect a pretty big return. For the most part, I just found the system to be a hindrance. It just wasn't fun to play around with for me. I felt very restricted in what I could use, even if I wanted to go to a different blood code for different passives, I just couldn't because the weapons I was using would not fit that. Centralizing your blood veils into jails is just a different experience. They no longer greatly alter your defenses, which means you're focused on just choosing the one you like the most. They do play a limited role in defense, so I wound up using the Hounds since they offer the highest resistances to basic attacks. But for the most part, the defense stuff didn't really matter. I didn't really favor Code Vein 2's customization style, because it restricts my preferred playstyle, which is really just fiddling with options until I find the best defensive build I can muster, and charging in with that defense and a mix of offensive skills. Admittedly, I am not an efficient player of any game that I play. I play Monster Hunter with full defense. I play Elden Ring with a tower shield and full defense. But enough about customization. Let's talk about the combat a little bit. I'm also mixed on that. I spent a long time on some bosses, longer than I would in most other Souls-likes I've played, which is not many. I've played like 2. The problem comes with a mix of my own misunderstandings of the game and the incredibly oppressive and unenjoyable design of some of the boss fights in this game. Let's address the one that people are not going to fully agree with me on first. I think Code Vein 2 has a mix of bosses that range from decent to complete bullshit. Most fights in this game did not leave me with a sense of accomplishment upon completing them. I was just glad I would never have to do it again. And I think a lot of this has to do with how some enemies present their moves. While it's not a Souls-like, I think Monster Hunter is a series that has nearly perfected understanding boss fights, because this series is pretty much only about boss fights. Monster body language and behavior is a core component to the gameplay. Making enemies readable is vital to making these 20-minute boss fights feel fair. And my experience with Code Vein 2 is that I don't think the game is very good at this. It's not that you can't tell when an attack is coming, but it is that you cannot always tell what attack is coming. Given the speed at which some of the combat takes place, sometimes you can tell an attack is coming when you've already taken a big swing. One of my least favorite fights in this game is this giant witch horror that mixes both big AoE sword swings and a multitude of very fast, powerful projectiles. She teleports, and when she goes high, you know it's going to be one of 2 moves. In one instance, she fires 4 homing projectiles at you, and the other one is this stupid beam that inflicts stone, which turns your character into rock and makes you unable to move. You can cure this with the stone vaccine, but also it's kind of hard to do that in the mix of a fight. Essentially, once you get turned to stone, she transitions into a high-speed lunge attack, and it's pretty hard to dodge when you turn to rock, and then you recover and then she instantly hits you. The problem was also discerning which move is which, because when she does the 4 projectile attacks, you have a pretty good amount of time to start dodging. When she does the stone move, that projectile is very fast, and it hits multiple times. Ultimately, it could be my inexperience, but I just felt like some of these fights were not fun, they weren't interesting, it was just obnoxious. There are other fights in the game that also have these issues, and I felt like being able to read what an enemy was going to do just became an intensely annoying uphill battle. On top of that, it feels like they tried to solve the problem of big enemies not being able to hit you by giving them little moves that kind of like bat you outwards so you're back in their range. The problem is those moves also do a shit ton of damage, which is not fun to deal with. Because why? They're like little attacks. Just give them the knockback and it's fine. At some point, I just became tired of having to deal with it, especially against that tentacle freak. But I digress. A portion of my issues with the combat were also a lot about my own misunderstandings of the game. There were multiple times during this playthrough that I was going to drop this game. I desperately was unhappy with a lot of the things going on. And I can't fully tell you if it's just my misunderstandings, because now I've experienced that content, and I'm not going to go back and replay through a game that I spent 20 to 30 hours just dreading to play for this review. And I didn't want to review the game without having completed it either. But I thought about it. I did think about it. I was not happy. But let me explain. Code Vein 2 is a Souls-like, but it's not really played in the same way. This, of course, being granted that I've only played Elden Ring, Code Vein 2, and the beginning hours of Lords of the Fallen. But those games are much more keen on dodging. It's like ingrained in the player's mind that the game is dodge and hit. Parrying is also an option, but oftentimes you don't see players parrying in these games. Code Vein 2 makes a huge difference in defense because of a few different mechanics. Defensive forme are essentially your biggest tool in fights. This game not only gives you the option to block, but it actively encourages you to do so without restricting your weapon slots or anything like that. They give you a literal section for a defensive tool. And honestly, that shouldn't have surprised me given the repertoire of games this company makes. God Eater is also a game where if you're spending your time dodging attacks, you're kind of playing it wrong. You're actually more encouraged to block rather than dodge. While there aren't a ton of differences in the defensive forme, there are a good number of options. These include frontal shields that offer high damage reduction on block, a trio of shields that block from all angles at a mildly less effective rate, a parrying glove that allows you to parry enemy attacks and launch a counterattack, and several different styles of dodging that you can use instead of using the lightweight class if you can't reach lightweight. Ultimately, the choice is up to you, but I chose to use the defensive option that gave me the greatest safety net, which is the tri-shields. On top of that, the game also offers a substantial number of revives via the partner system. In combat, unlike the first game, your partner is invincible. They cannot be killed. However, when you die, they take it upon themselves to revive you, putting them into a cooldown state, and during this state, you cannot revive, because if they're in cooldown, you know. Each revive means subsequently less health you get back, so the first time you die, they give you back your full health, the second time it's like maybe 2/3 of that, and then it just keeps going down until you have like barely any health for a revive. But this cooldown state also extends the number of times they revive you. Ultimately, this is all well and good, especially for players who are not incredibly good at Souls-likes. It can make the game a lot easier, but the one major flaw in this system is how long the revival animation takes place. When you revive, it's not like everything around you stops. The enemy doesn't stop attacking you. So you can revive and instantly get downed again. And I'm just saying that if you're going to do that, then I would rather you just cut out the part where I'm in a coma and just kill me. It doesn't feel good to get a revive and then to instantly die right after from something that is completely unreactable, because the game will not let you cancel the revival animation. And of course, this is where I faltered. My biggest issue in this game was realizing how many defensive options I'd been given and how little I had been utilizing them during the game. But figuring this out helped me develop different strategies that I needed in fights. Of course, this didn't solve all the issues I had with the combat experience, but managing my blocking efficiently helped improve that combat experience overall. Additionally, the partner system offers another unique perk, which is that your partners have passives that can buff you. Depending on the partner you choose, you also get different passives, and this can really spice up your combat potential. You'll also need to manage your LP gauge because you have your HP, which is the yellow bar, and your LP, which is the blue bar. And the LP is kind of a shield that your partner gives you. But when the LP is gone, those buffs you had from your partner will also be gone. There are some passives you get to keep, but it's not all of them. Admittedly, my one problem is that your partner is kind of part of your build. You can choose whether to have them summoned or not, but these passives are kind of part of the build, and there are some parts of the game that completely restrict you to certain partners. So it's a little awkward when your build is made very specifically for this partner, and the game is like, no, you're going to use this guy now because you're not allowed to use the other guy. And I don't know, it's a little weird because it feels like the game is so customization and build centric, but I also get that, like, in the context of the story, some partners are just not available at certain times. So it's a mixed bag there as well. It's not as simple as the first, in my opinion, and while that can be a good thing, sometimes compounding too many mechanics on at once can create a lot of issues in the long run. The game is just trying to get you to use all its systems from the get-go, and it's up to you to do so. The combat ranges in quality, but a heavy part of it is the player's understanding of almost every mechanic. And as much as I almost forgot about this in-game, there's bequeathed for me. These are basically an extra weapon slot that kind of acts as a special move. When you use these, like skills, they consume your E-core, which you use for special dodges and your skills, as I said before. So in a sense, I treated these as special attacks and pretty much never used them because they're slow and I just didn't feel like they were much use. I did use the bow in some instances just to hit enemies from far away, but the further I got into the game, the less I actually remembered I even had the bow. I think once I hit the end of the second or third major quest, I just kind of stopped using it. So now I've spent a ton of time explaining the combat to you, but my experience with the game shifted back and forth fairly often. I've settled in now, but a vast majority of my experience was made better by putting aside an hour just to grind haze to level. For reference, I finished this game at over level 170. If someone tells you that leveling does not make a big difference, I disagree. It is one way to improve your character. The next way is... much like how this game clearly takes inspiration from Elden Ring's open world design and exploration, that exploration is a core component to making the most of combat in this game. That said, I feel as though there are some heavy flaws with the exploration. The nice thing is that the world isn't nearly as big as it seems. The distance between 2 points on the map is actually very short. Sometimes a second or two on the motorcycle is really all you need to get from point A to point B. But honestly, the actual navigation of the map is kind of tedious. The world is not the same as Elden Ring or Breath of the Wild, where what you see is what you get. There are areas where you simply just cannot scale upward any further, there are limitations that exist, and on the surface, I think that's fine. You know, there have been open worlds in the past where there are clearly limitations. But if you're gonna cut off my access to areas that look accessible, then just don't make them look accessible. You can usually tell when terrain is too steep for you to jump up or like stand on because the game will color it differently. You know, that's a game design thing. Usually when a ledge is covered in grass and it's green, it usually means your character can stand on it, but it doesn't mean they'll be able to because you have to, you know, get to that ledge. There are just areas where the skybox just cuts off and you can't jump higher, and the camera keeps like glitching around, basically telling you, yeah, you're not gonna go above this. The game is not programmed to let you do that. And I just wish the game's terrain was just designed to show that, so I didn't waste so much time trying to go up certain areas. There also comes the issue of how the story is meant to progress versus how the exploration allows you to progress. This might have been a me problem because the quest log actually does sort out the stories in chronological order, but you get them all at once. You get all 3 hero quests at once. You can go to whichever one you want to start off. But the order I completed them is Sunken City, Undead Forest, and Corroded Scar. The actual order you're supposed to complete them in is Sunken City, Corroded Scar, Undead Forest, and this vastly influenced how I felt about this game. I was struggling for hours with Undead Forest, believing the game just had a ridiculously big difficulty spike. And then I went back through Corroded Scar and whooped the game's ass. And is this my fault or the game's fault? Mostly mine, probably. I mean, when is it not, right? But I can't help but feeling like the game, with a much greater focus on its story, should have more structure. A lot of these open world games where you can go anywhere actually have fairly unstructured stories. Elden Ring actively encourages you to seek out easier content. They do this by placing the Tree Sentinel as the first boss you encounter, and you have trouble beating it because, you know, it's your first time playing a Souls-like, and you go, maybe I should go somewhere else. And the world is open to you. You can go wherever you want. They present roadblocks, but not in a narrative form. And this is the same for Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, and if you really want to get into it, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. And you won't just be traversing the world once, you'll have to do it multiple times through different eras. The marketing made it seem like traversing and doing actions in the past would change how things appear in the present. And that is a little true, but it's also kind of hard to get into it without spoilers, but to be blunt, it doesn't really impact all that much. Some of your most important collectibles in the open world are things that would drastically shift your abilities in-game. As an example, failing to collect items that would improve your regeneration or your healing will be a detriment to you as you progress through the game, because the amount that you can get back from healing is a lot. And that's part of why I found this game to be so difficult, because I kept missing the golden beads, which would enhance the effect of my regeneration. So I'd gotten a ton of the golden nectar, so I was able to have 11 regen attempts, but the gold beads, I got 2 of them, and I figured there just weren't that many. But I guess I just disregarded the locations. I didn't see them when I went past them. This isn't a game where it really tells you where anything is. I mean, the golden beads are located in very obvious towers, so when you see that tower, you know it's going to be a golden bead, but I don't know, I just ran past a bunch of them without noticing. In short, the time you dedicate to exploring the open world will have a profound impact on your experience. For me, I felt that the open world was kind of dull. I think my expectations were geared towards using different eras to take advantage of different varieties of enemies that would exist in each era. So maybe in the past, a dungeon would have human enemies, and then if you went to the one in the present, that dungeon would be overrun with horrors. And then by taking out the humans in the past, you could prevent that dungeon from having enemies, or there'd be like a different layout with like not enemies there. Whatever it might be, I just thought that changing things in the past would have a bigger effect on things in the present, and it ultimately does not change that much. There are variations in some aspects. For the most part, it doesn't really change that much. And another small gripe I had was just the angle the motorcycle camera is. It just felt kind of weird for it to be in this like left box of the screen and not in the middle like most driving games would have. Not a big deal, but a little small gripe, a nitpick, if you would. Overall, the open world is fine, I guess. It feels basic. A lot of the drops you get aren't really worth that much. And I would have vastly preferred the linear structured design of the original game to this. But in the interest of embracing the concept, I think it's a fairly average open world that had a lot more potential via the time travel aspects and fails to take any real advantage of that. If there is an element that deserves the endless praise, it's the soundtrack. Goshina, or if that's how you pronounce it, has once again composed an array of masterful songs that accompany and amplify the game's narrative and character moments. This game doesn't have a wide variety of songs to use, but it uses them only to enhance the narrative. I would argue that the soundtrack is half the reason I felt how I did at the pivotal moments in this game's story. It's an incredibly powerful OST that I don't have the expertise to break down or describe. You'll just have to hear it yourself.
Now, I stimulate my hippocampus in earnest! I simply pray my mighty cerebellum doesn't blow Magbell to oblivion!
Shift has never been an expert at narratives. As much as I do like God Eater's story and characters, there's definitely a wide divide between it and a lot of other games. Code Vein's original story was a tragic and heart-wrenching tale when you put all the pieces together, but it suffered a lot from the very fast pacing early on, and some slow pacing as well. It really just wanted to set up the party. I think the end result was a decent story about found family and a group of revenants who were able to lean on each other and free themselves from the confines of the world that had been placed on them. Code Vein 2 steps away from this to produce its own story, as I've said multiple times. It's getting old, and I'm going to keep saying it. I think the narrative introduction of this game is not very good. The early parts of the story remove any potential roadblocks and tension in order to get them to the meat and bones of it. It is, by and large, an effort to rapidly introduce the player to the core of the story, but in my opinion, it's not really an engaging hook. If you can eke by that pretty low bar at the beginning, the story becomes a lot better sometimes. I think the main problem is merging this Elden Ring-esque open world with a narrative that actually has some semblance of structure to it. As I previously explained, the story lacks structure. The main thing is that you can play the middle of the story in almost any order, and this means you can't rely on any parts to be experienced in a specific order when you're writing the narrative. And I think that hurts it overall because this is still a JRPG story. There are some interesting moments, to say the least, but for the most part, I think the story does deliver when it matters. The emotional moments are a real gut punch, and if you understand and get a feel for the people you meet, then they hurt all the more. Each of the heroes is unique in their own way, and I felt their stories etch themselves into my heart. That said, it's coupled with some of their frustrating fights, which I'll get into a little later. I think Code Vein 2 hits when it counts, and that's important. The tragic state of the heroes in the present day really makes you want to go back and change their past, so that when you do have to slay them, they can go in peace and not in suffering. It's a story about persevering for the sake of the future and leaving behind hope for tomorrow for those you hold dear. Fighting today for the sake of a better tomorrow. Another issue I had, and this is not in the script, I just remembered to mention it. For some reason I didn't write it here. The characters never really interact with each other until the very end. There are small interactions here and there, but ultimately I wish these three heroes wound up interacting more because they all appear in Magmel in one of the past eras that you're free to explore. And there's barely any interaction between them, which doesn't set them up well as like a party. It just kind of makes them all feel like their individual storylines are just completely separate from each other. And it's kind of weird because there's an instance where after you save Noah, he comes in and he's like, "I'm Noah." And I'm like, you guys have been in the same building this whole time. Like, all of these heroes have been in the same building this whole time. You come back to explore this area for all the side quests and stuff, and you guys have never introduced yourselves? It's kind of weird because, I don't know, it just feels kind of silly. And I'm going to get into some spoilers here. These are going to be light spoilers. I won't talk about specific events in the story, but I am going to spoil things like the number of endings and whatever. So skip ahead to the Mark chapter if you don't want to hear about it, because the one after this is also another spoiler chapter where I actually go into the stuff in depth a little bit. For one, I'm incredibly disappointed that this game does not take advantage of the rules set in place by the time travel narrative. The original Code Vein had multiple outcomes for each major story beat. When you defeat the successors in-game, it was possible for you to save them or to leave them to die. Depending on how you approach this, your ending would be altered. Code Vein 2 abandons this, and I think that's disappointing. In-game, the idea is built up that changing the past can also lead to consequences in the future, and they really beat this into you. It's in the first arc with Noah, they beat it into you. It's in the second arc with Jose. It's in the third arc with Lyle. Holly, I think they do it a little bit less, but whatever. But it is kind of odd that this game is about time travel, and it's the one that doesn't have multiple endings. It's not a deal breaker for me, but it just seems like a weird choice. The game continuously beats into you that altering the past is dangerous, and yet there is no real consequence for you doing so. Nor is there an ending based on if you chose not to alter the past. Now I'm going to talk about more specific spoilers, so you'll probably want to skip to the next section if you don't want to be spoiled. First off is Noah's arc. At the beginning, it's pretty weak. He kind of instantly trusts you in circumstances where he probably shouldn't just be trusting you off the bat. And any potential tension is discarded because we need to get the story moving and get out of this intro arc. It's fine, but I felt like it was kind of rushed. Jose's arc is weird. I'm not a big fan of the fake girlfriend trope in anime, so that's not really gonna help anything. Thankfully, it doesn't really matter. Her character has a lot more depth than Noah's does, and hearing about her past leading up to her being sealed is pretty sad. Interestingly enough, it's nice that they hint at you revisiting her later after the first boss fight. I actually wound up doing Holly's arc right after Jose, and Holly is certainly a character. She's very caring. Her side quest chain is also pretty amusing as well, and well worth doing, especially for the upgrades you get for your character. It's interesting to see Lou unable to retain her connection to the past, but I don't believe that's ever really addressed in any way. Maybe I'm misremembering. Funnily enough, I'd hear a lot of people had issues with the second fight with Holly, and it wound up not being too difficult to me, and I think part of that is just due to luck, because I wholly understand why that fight would be obnoxious. Now, the interesting part is after I beat Holly, I got Lisa's hairpin, and then I went back to save Jose. And then I got kind of stuck, because through a bunch of events, you finally get a reason as to why changing the past is incredibly dangerous, as Gobo takes the future tech and your connection to the present begins to fall apart, because now there's a huge alteration in the timeline. But I feel like nothing really happens after this. The game kind of sticks you in the past, and now you have to defeat Gobo, and there was my issue with being vastly underpowered, is that it resulted in one of the worst experiences I've had fighting a boss in this game. I really don't like the Gobo and Oscar fight. And during the fight, Gobo teleports Oscar away, and he's just never brought up again. Which was kind of confusing, because I feel like at some point I thought he would show up again, or someone down his lineage would show up again to wrap up his arc. But I guess not. It's just not important. Goodbye, NPC, man. I'm not losing sleep over not having to fight him again. But this fight is intended to come after you've completed Lyle's arc as well, which I did not do till after this. So I keep saying that the narrative has issues structurally, because you're constantly warned about changing the past and how dangerous it is to do that during Lyle's arc. And it's funny to continuously hear about it after I've already done the event that is the consequence for altering the past. Anyways, Zenon's arc is my favorite. He's an eccentric guy who loves his wife, but he's also probably my favorite character in the game. And I can't deny that he's really a breath of fresh air when compared to everyone else. And once you do reach the first ending, I do love that they have him appear and basically say, hey, there's more to do. Hit the continue, let's go, chop chop. To be blunt, the first ending is just bait, and I really wouldn't call it an ending like everyone else seems to call it. Everyone says this game has like 3 endings. It really only has 2, and I don't even know if I would call it that, because the third ending is obtainable without another playthrough of the game. Like, there's no, if you get the second ending, you can get the third one still. You just have to go back and do everything. I do think it's a bit weird that Lady Lavinia is just kind of set free after our initial confrontation, but it's fine. She doesn't do anything to interfere, and since she knows that the ceiling will fail, she's like, oh, you know. This game ends on a happy note, and I think that's fine because it shows that all of our efforts meant something. We saved all the heroes, and in the end, they save us. For some reason, Lavinia in that time kind of talks like she cares about us, but we don't know her, she doesn't know who we are. And maybe that's because she can sense a change in the timeline, or she's learned more about us as time goes on, who knows. To be honest, I think the narrative and characters are the strongest element of this game, but it's not surprising that people don't feel encouraged. But it's not surprising that people don't feel engaged by it from the start. The more I played, the more invested I became in the story, but this feels final. I don't know how well this game is selling compared to the first, given the circumstances, but if they do make a third game, hopefully we can go back to the original storyline, right? My time with Code Vein 2 has left me mixed. I feel like the potential of this game is mainly squandered by the open world, which failed to leave any major impact on me. There are a lot of games taking inspiration from Breath of the Wild, and by extension, games that take inspiration from games that take inspiration from Breath of the Wild. And in this case, it's clear that that inspiration is Elden Ring. The problem with it is that the openness of the open world just leads to narrative issues when you have a structured story going through it. Both of those games have a very hands-off approach when it comes to the order of the narrative, and meanwhile Code Vein 2 does actually have an intended order in which we are supposed to follow before reaching the end. For me, it just kind of hinders the game overall. The combat is a mixed bag, and it is heavily tied to how much you explored the open world. It makes sense, but is a hard pill to swallow when the majority of exploration led to things that I was never necessarily benefited from, personally. And if you're not good at exploring and finding the right things, then the game is just a pain. I missed a ton of gold bead towers, and that led me to not upgrading my regeneration until the late game, which made the combat experience pretty abysmal. It is technically my fault, but if you're the kind of person that overlooks certain elements when you're wandering an open world, and you have a habit of missing dungeons here and there, because you're just not exploring everything, you know, you're just going about your path, wherever the wind takes you, you're gonna miss some stuff. There are a lot of options though, and exploration helps you unlock a ton of them. That said, I pretty much stuck to the same build for the whole game. Never felt much of a reason to do anything else. Slow weapons didn't feel good to play, given how much damage I was taking, how little my healing did, and also because every enemy was on my ass whenever I left a small opening. So I used fast weapons that gave me extra movement and just quicker approaches and easier staggers for some reason. Overall, Code Vein 2 has its redeeming qualities, but ultimately is just okay. I don't think it's horrible, but I think some of the design decisions are a little confusing and don't really help the game on a structural level. It's solid, but that doesn't excuse the myriad of performance issues I also had, like frame drops, which I dealt with several times, abysmal lighting, and model and texture loading speeds. And in terms of just the model and texture speeds loading, this is not an uncommon problem for Bandai games. Tales of Arise, which I played on arguably much weaker hardware, also had this loading issue where the textures would not load instantly, so you would be stuck with low-res textures that you see transition into high-res textures. I would like to note that I played this on PC, and my PC is not a low-spec machine. Also, there are some moments in cutscenes where the characters' models will just unload. It's very brief, but it's there, you can see it, or you can see them load in. I don't know, this game needs an optimization patch. And for some reason, I forgot to mention this in the script. If you watched my first impressions, then you probably know what this part's about. The R1 button is used for everything in this game. It's used for picking up items, opening chests, talking to characters, advancing dialogue, and so on and so forth. And the problem with that is that the game is not programmed around this, because the way you advance dialogue, even when characters are talking, is by pressing R1. A lot of games don't let you advance audible dialogue, it just kind of plays out automatically. In this game they let you do that, which is not uncommon for Bandai games. But the problem with that is that it creates a issue with the game where you will press R1 because you're walking and you just want to pick something up and it'll skip dialogue. And this isn't a consistent thing either, because sometimes you'll press R1 and you'll be able to pick things up, but it won't let you advance the dialogue. So it doesn't help you form the habit of not pressing the button during speech. But if you're gonna lock me into advancing dialogue with the R1 button, then I feel like they should just have a cutscene or something where you can't do anything else except the dialogue, and you shouldn't have prompts coming up on the screen that you can also advance with R1, but when you press the button, it's a gamble on whether it's going to advance the dialogue, advance the prompts, pick up an item, or God knows what else. So that's my little rant about this game's favorite button, and it's kind of irritating. Also, something that bothered me is that you may notice that in the early sections of the game, if you know what parts of the game take place, I have a very silly character design. He looks like one of those, the emoji thing, the laughing, crying emoji thing. That got deleted because for some reason, and God only knows why, the game had a bug where the character creator data was erased. Like, it just completely erased my character creator data. So I didn't feel like taking the time to remake it, but it really kind of annoyed me a little bit, and I didn't feel like redoing it again because I already did it once. It kind of annoyed me. So I guess those are also two blemishes on the game otherwise, but I just wanted to throw that in there. I partially hated and partially enjoyed my time with Code Vein 2. Shift has once again shown their potential here, but there are definitely things that I think can be improved. And you can let me know what you think of Code Vein 2 in the comments down below. As always, leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe to the channel for more things Bandai, Code Vein, and JRPG related. I will likely be covering the Idris DLC when it releases, so you can probably stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Wait, yo. That was awesome.